Good evening, good evening, good evening. Hope you guys are all doing good, or whatever time slot it is, wherever you're listening from. Here in the UK, it's just gone 8 o'clock. The guests we've got tonight are from Dubai and all the way in the States. So we're kind of spread all over the place. So what can we say about our guest this week? Well, for those of you that watched Tuesday's show, you know it was ACEN. Now, just one of, if not the most prolific artist on production house back in the day, had a series of phenomenal releases. Close Your Eyes, Trip to the Moon, which of course, you know, pretty much soundtracked the whole of 1992. Window in the Sky, went on to do various other drum and bass tunes, breakbeat tunes, and then a couple of years ago, came back again. So this is always ultimately leading up to why everyone's so excited about ACEN coming back, not just because of Thriller, Play 2092, and all the great remixes that came out on Nightforce. It's about this box set, right? That's what we're excited about. It's a chance to own Trip to the Moon Part 1, 2, and 3, as you can see in the background. I've still got my original copies, but I still got another one because it's just a selection of phenomenal remixes with remastered versions. There's some dub plate versions in there as well. And of course, there's ACEN's 2092 versions in there. But before we get into that, we're going to catch up with ACEN and we're going to chat a little bit about the history of ACEN. So with great pleasure, I'm going to bring in ACEN. How you doing, mate? You all right?
Yeah. How you doing, man?
I'm doing very good, mate. Very good indeed, mate. It's nice to see you. So thank you very much, firstly, for staying up very late, because I know it's just gone midnight for you. So I'll try and keep this under 3-4 hours. All right.
No worries, mate.
So how's it going? You keeping well?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's pretty mad that you know, all these years later, I'm doing this. You know, talking to you about Trip to the Moon, you know, so that's kind of blown my mind. But I mean, yeah, I don't know where to start with it all, really. I mean, you'll have to ask me the questions, and then
don't you worry about that. You're in good hands. I'll take care of all of that. So look, let's start right back at the beginning. I always love asking this as the first question, because for me, you know, when a person, no matter what background they come from, wherever they are, female, male, it doesn't matter, their connection to music is such a magical moment. So do you remember the first time you heard a song and it did something different to what music before that had done, something that really triggered your interest in music?
Well, I mean, like, you know, the early 80s, watching things like the breakdance film that came out, I went to the cinema to watch that. That really moved me. And just the whole electro scene kind of just a bit before that, you know, Grandmaster Flash, and sort of like going out buying 7 inches at our price. And, you know, I mean, that's kind of where I kind of stem from when it comes to music. It was always electro, and then a bit later kind of, you know, a little bit of house, the kind of Chicago house thing in sort of 1986 or 1987, that sort of vibe. But yeah, I mean, and hip hop, obviously Public Enemy, you know, a bit later than that, 1988. Obviously, you know, school, that just left school and kind of like, you know, starting to get into kind of decks and kind of vinyl and all that thing. But yeah, I mean,
had you picked up a bit of an interest as like a DJ before you started kind of producing records?
Oh yeah. I mean, but more sort of in the late 80s, kind of as a just mainly hip hop. You know, I was always buying, you know, Strong Island and all these kind of 12 inches. I'd go up into town, and I can't even remember the record shop, but there's one in Soho, and they'd always have these really dodgy sort of I don't know what you call it. It's almost like a master mix of every sort of hip hop, or, you know, it could be the Jungle Book samples in there from the movie. And, you know, I can't remember the names of them because my memory's shot these years. But basically, that's the kind of thing that moved me, was just getting that vibe of getting this sort of like white label, I guess. And then going back home and then trying to sort of, you know, mix them in with other stuff that I've built up over the sort of, you know, mid 80s and late 80s kind of thing.
So did you? Sorry, you go on.
No, that was it. Go on. You
I was going to say, like, I'm intrigued because I didn't really know that the DJing was the kind of introduction of music. So I just want to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
How did you learn to DJ? Obviously, hip hop is a very different kind of style of mixing compared to like kind of house and stuff. Me and my mates, we didn't have any friends that DJ'd. We just basically figured it out really badly and over a horrendously long period of time. How did you kind of sort of get to sort of build up your craft and skills as a DJ?
I mean, look, I kind of came from a sort of, I mean, I was a break dancer in the early sort of 80s, and
Nice.
and that kind of just, obviously the music was a whole. I mean, that was a whole scene in itself. I mean, going out, a bit of graffiti here and there, and kind of cheeky little getting the cans and kind of school walls and whatever. But
yeah. What was your tag?
It was, funnily enough, it was ACEN back then. weirdly enough. I know it's crazy that years late after that I used it then for the first record, which I didn't want to use. It was just I was thinking up all these kind of cool sort of, I don't know, kind of drug infused sort of names back then. In the early sort of 1990 when it was just an explosion of like everything, acid, and kind of, it was just like something that was just tripped out. And I think I had like a list of names, and in the end I couldn't think of anything, and Raj at Production House just went, "Oh look, I'm just going to put your name down as you've written it."
Yeah,
because I had it quite low as just like maybe, but I didn't really want to go there. That would just felt too boring.
I suppose. And then actually a version of your middle name, right?
No, I mean that is the first name. So ACEN Raspberry. I mean, it's just I grew up with people calling me all sorts of, not calling me ACEN.
Yeah,
they call me ACEN or Aiken or whatever, or Acne or whatever. But I mean, it was just one of those things. It's just like it had to just become my sort of artist name, if you like, when I couldn't think of anything. And I didn't really think much of, I mean, I just didn't think it was going to do any. I didn't think when I made Close Your Eyes, for instance, it took so long to come out that I'd almost forgotten about it. It was just suddenly there up at the record shop up in, I used to see Nicky Black Market, sort of taking it. I mean, the first time I used to go up there a lot, and then one week I kind of went up there and just saw my record, and sort of Nicky Black Market sort of waving it around and kind of playing it, and I was so embarrassed that I had to leave. I just couldn't. It was just so phenomenal to be like, wow, I've been going here, for sort of months and getting into the whole vibe, and all of a sudden there's my tune, and it just hadn't occurred to me that my record would hit that record shop.
Well, because record shop holy grails, right? These were like the center of and the source of music. You get flyers, you get tape packs, tickets. This is where you went, to meet other like-minded DJs, to find out the latest music.
Yeah, I mean, my local store was sort of in Ealing, in Northfields. It was called Vinyl Mania. So I was there like almost every other day, and every weekend, just picking up everything, anything that like that scene in that film or whatever, where you just like you just get a stack of them, and that's it. You don't even listen to half of them, but yeah, I mean, it was a little bit different for me. That I kind of got railroaded. I just, the DJing thing sort of took a backseat when I started getting into producing. So I just wasn't, weirdly, I kind of lost interest in becoming a DJ and sort of trying to mix records. I was so fascinated by how these tunes were made. I mean, one tune that really moved me was Rebel MC, Wickedest Sound. I mean, I was already sort of making tunes around that time, but it was kind of just that, I mean, just that sound and it just, I mean, it really every sort of tune that came out after that kind of moved me in a way, and kind of influenced me, inspired me to then make Close Your Eyes, and then the other tunes that came out. yeah, I was really obviously big into samples, and that all stemmed from way back, even when with hip hop, you know, that you're always looking for the next big sample, you know, and so yeah, I mean,
part of the culture, right? So let me rewind just a little bit. So when did you first kind of become aware that, you know, you being able to make music was actually reality? You know, it wasn't just these kind of massive studios, the Warners, Universals, and what have you. You know, when you were like, actually, I can do this.
Well, I mean, I did do a sort of media type BTEC course thing, which kind of opened my eyes to music tech, if you like. Back then, it was very. I mean, it was still kind of like 4-track recorders and you know, like a Korg M1 synths when they just came out, and then things like the W30, the Roland W30 had just sort of landed. So we're talking sort of 1989, 1990. So you was able to sort of buy this sort of all-in-one sort of workstation where you could sample something. It would have a bank of sounds, and you could then, you know, make a tune, as it were, without much else. So what was your, sorry, what was the question?
So
It was how
is how you kind of became aware of like kind of studio gear that made it a reality for you, that you could start doing this yourself.
Yeah, I mean, so this course I went to was in Hammersmith, West London College. It was just, I mean, I'd done that, I think, for about 2 years or something. And that kind of got, you know, that's what got my brain working in how to start make it reality. You know, I mean, then sort of making a tune that was part of a scene, that was not, I mean, that was, this for me was almost like a hobby. It was just like, okay, I kind of like this, I want to get into it. And then, you know, friends were knocking on the door, we were going out, we're hitting a rave in, you know, I think it was something called Rush or something in Northfield. There was loads of local things going on every week. I mean, it was just like, you know, meet up at the pub and then drive off, and you're in Peckham next minute, you know, and then hearing all these tunes, hearing like Ragged Twins and Shut Up and Dance. And so you would then come back, and then, you know, weirdly enough, I then started to slow sort of buying the next big tune. I'd know those tunes because you'd hear them on the radio, like Kiss FM, Steve Jackson. You'd hear all the exclusive. But I then wanted to gravitate towards samples, so I would go hunting in charity shops for BBC sounds, and you know, I really, then the cog started to work, and it was like, okay, I had this workstation, and then just started kind of, you know, I think I spent about 6 months just sort of learning and getting into it, and kind of, you know, it was just it was sort of natural, organic process. I was going out, coming back, making a couple of shit tracks, and then going out, coming back, making something a little bit better, and then then I kind of had Close Your Eyes, and then it was just a really rough version. I mean, I'm talking about like just that Jim Morrison sample.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it was even just Close Your Eyes. It wasn't even Forget Your Name, Forget the World. It was just just that bit over a breakbeat with a bass line, and I was chuffed with that. You know? and then I'd go and play that round, you know, my mate's house, and we'd, you know, in Greenford, and then we'd go to a party, we'd take the tape out, put that in, and you see people quite liking it, and then you're like, okay, this is pretty cool, and you go back and get inspired to finish it or make something more of it.
Yeah.
And then I mean, I don't know if I don't know if it's work. I mean, so I mean, I'm already get sort of segueing into the story of how Close Your Eyes came out.
You flow with it, mate. You go with it. You go.
But so basically, I think almost months later, I'd done a few different versions of it, and people started coming round, like mates of mates who were interested in music, and were like, oh, you know, so and so's got a sampler and blah blah blah, and he's making tunes, and so. One guy came round, and I can't even remember his name. That's how vague people. I mean, people used to just knock on your door and go, "I'm a mate of so and so, and I just heard you had this sampler thing, and I make tunes myself, or I'm interested in making tunes." And anyway, he took long story short. After a few sort of like jamming sessions to try and work on something, he then took Close Your Eyes away, and he knew David, DMS, and Floyd. Then a knock on the door sort of a week later. It was like, oh, there's this small record label and blah blah blah, and I know them, and it's a DJ, and he would likes Close Your Eyes, and he thinks you should come and see them and all this. And I was just like, I just didn't think nothing. Okay, let's just get in the car and just like go down there.
Yeah, see what happens.
Yeah, and see what happens. And there we were, one Herbert Gardens, and Floyd came to the door and just sort of, was like, all right, mate, and then we went upstairs, chatted about this tune. And then I just saw their studio. It was like, I mean, it was a pretty state-of-the-art studio for back then. So I knew they weren't mucking around, even though it was a studio in a house. So it was like a proper full-on, the name of the mixing desk, AMR or something like that, DDA, just a huge console with the MPC 60, reel to reel, etc. And I'd see Terry, Nino in there sort of jamming away on some R&B stuff. And so and I mean, look, I sat down with David and Floyd. They were obviously ravers. We all spoke the same language. They'd say, look, come down so and so. We're doing a PA there for House Screw or whatever. And I kind of hung out with them for a while, and then a few weeks later, we decided to, Raj had given me a sort of a contract for Close Your Eyes, and that kind of took a while to sort of work out, got a bit of back and forth. And then we were in the studio, I think probably about a month after that meeting or something.
So I then shipped like kind of early 91 type time?
Yeah, almost like, I feel like it was like the end of 1990. It was kind of like, very cold, Christmassy kind of, it was like the beginning, sort of winter, sort of 90, kind of meeting them all and then going into the studio, and then kind of early 91 or mid 91 is when Close Your Eyes came out, I think, because you had the first record and then you had the remix that kind of followed a couple of months later.
Yeah.
And it was...
So talk to us about, so how much like was Close Your Eyes kind of done at the point that you got into production house, or was there kind of some further development of the track when you got there?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I'd say 80% done. I mean, it was a demo, so it was like it just needed to be sort of mixed and polished or whatever. At that time, I'd made it all on one workstation, and I kind of brought that in. But then when we got into the studio, we kind of transferred the samples over to the MPC 60, and then start building, sort of almost building another remix of it, but using that as a template, using that as a blueprint, and then working on the sort of B side, the Vitamin E mix, a couple of weeks later, I think, if I can remember, and all of a sudden we just had that, and it was, and like I said, then they were like, okay, what name, and all that all happened in the sort of month ahead, and I'd almost forgotten about it, because obviously it does its thing, it kind of goes through the system. I think other records were waiting to come out, and they had their own sort of self-distribution system, so things took a bit of time, and I think, I mean, I probably heard it on the radio once or twice, which was, almost like, I mean, the feeling of that was pretty amazing as well.
Yeah.
Just to hear Steve Jackson saying your name wrong. I think he called me Aiken a few times. And then the PA started to rolling, because obviously the house crew were out already, quite a big name doing their thing, and I would almost be sort of like tagging on the back of that, they'd then throw my name in the mix.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, like David DMS was already smashing it with Exterminate, around that sort of time.
Yeah. What do you remember the first time that you heard Close Your Eyes in a club, like someone else playing?
Yeah, I think it was the Rocket. Funny enough, and it was. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when you hear your tune in the club, it's just, for me, it's. I'm a little bit shy, so I feel embarrassed because everyone's pointing at me, and I think back then they used to take the piss out of you when you've got your tune. The people that know you, and your mates, you rock up with your mates, and they're out there, they're raving, and that everyone's doing their thing. But then when your tune comes out, it's almost like I wanted to hide, but it's just the way, rather than sort of, enjoy the thing. And I'd always be critical as well. I'd always be hearing it from the critical side. So I'd be hearing, it's not quite as loud as other tunes I'd be hearing, or it was, I could have maybe arranged it better. So I didn't enjoy it like maybe other people would. So anyway. Yeah.
No worries. All right. Well, look, I wanted to ask you, and this kind of leads on to a few of the kind of remixes and versions that you've done. You've made up a couple of different names of the versions. Now, I think I've almost always said these wrong. So the optical fusion, close your eyes. Yeah. Did I say that right? And I know that there was also, Trip to the Moon, Kaleidoscope to Climax one.
Yeah.
And also there was other ones. What was the inspiration behind these names for the tracks?
I mean, look, man, back then, I mean, I'm a different person to that person. So I mean, I used to just make up stuff on the fly. I mean, it just sounded cool. It was just like optic confusion, obviously confusion, optics, close your eyes. I mean, there's probably some sort of artistic license in there somewhere. It's just, it was just, I think that mix kind of then set it off to, obviously, for Trip to the Moon. And then later with Window in the Sky with Monolithic Maniac, it just became a theme, I guess. You kind of just, just kind of, you make the next track and then you start to then look back for inspiration to then, for names and how it can almost sort of all stitch together somehow, Yeah.
Nice. Well, I mean, if there were 3 releases which ever stitched together, it was Trip to the Moon Part 1, 2, and 3, right? Just before we get onto that, I just want to say big up to everyone that's locked on and listening, everyone that shared, got involved, followed, subscribed, and all that kind of jazz. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a few questions in a little bit if anyone wants to ask a question. So just pop it in the comments, whether you're on Twitch, YouTube, or on Facebook, and I will bring it up on screen and we'll do our best to get an answer. So before we talk about Trip to the Moon, I do want to say a couple of things. And I said this on Tuesday when we did the ACEN showcase. And this was very typical of production house. And I didn't quite realize this until I'd listened to a load of production house tunes, but there was definitely a style with production house, and it was very musical. It wasn't just 32 bars of beats and then there was the drop and then there was this, that, and the other. There was definitely a story. There was definitely you could play every song start to finish and it was interesting from the very beginning. So it was kind of very clear that your style is definitely very well suited to production house. I also want to say as well that it's interesting hearing you talk about the sampling. I've got to say, I'd kind of put you up there with Liam Howlett as like the master of samples. You were hugely creative with those, and it's always interesting when you hear a track and you go, hold on a minute, did ACEN use that? And it's amazing. So to have both of those as quite a natural skill set for yourself, it's no wonder that you produce these kind of phenomenal tunes.
Yeah, I mean, like with the music side of things, as in like trying to arrange something musically, I don't know how to read or write music. It was always just a feeling. It's like you take a break beat, you put that down, you play in a bass line, and even piano. I mean, I sort of taught myself the kind of chords of Trip to the Moon Part 3 in between Trip to the Moon Part 2 and Part 3, if you like. There was a bit of a gap there. And I done that on purpose because it was getting to that point where the sample thing was getting a bit stupid and people were sort of saying to me, it kind of felt, it was almost a bit played out to sort of just use another at that time. So I wanted to kind of make something a little bit more played and a bit more original and kind of think of that I got into. I was into a lot of warehouse stuff. Obviously, I mean, LFO is one of my favorite tunes, and that's just a riff, a square wave, a bleep, just kind of going. And I was a big fan of all those kind of early kind of warp tunes, which were just almost built up a sort of like 4 or 5 elements, you know, Nightmares and Wax and all the rest of it. That's kind of, I'd say that was another big movement for me. That was another big, you know, sort of early 1990, kind of going out and Ealing, and kind of going to these kind of warehouse, kind of house raves, if you like, and that heavily influenced me. So I was just always about trying to create something musically, but not too musical, if you like. It was just something that was like an earworm, that, you know, it's just something that was catchy and kind of that I, you know, I would kind of like myself. I mean, with production house and kind of making musical stuff, I think that Floyd comes from a very musical background. In the 80s, I've been sort of producing stuff with Phil Fearon, who was making, you know, pop sort of soul stuff with Galaxy. So I think that in terms of sort of musicianship, that Floyd is got a very kind of solid background in that, and maybe me coming together with him, working on stuff like Close Your Eyes, that's where the sort of chemistry, if you like, you know, sort of switch these records that could have gone one way, but kind of went a slightly different way, because that is the sound, that is the reason why I think they're, you know, Fantasy is, you know, when that came out, I mean, I at the time wasn't a huge fan of Fantasy, because it was just sort of almost too musical for me. But then it was like, you know, a year later, it's just in, you know, you can't fault it. That's why it went to number 1. It was just the chords, the melody, everything, and that's where I think is this genius of Mr. Floyd Dice, you know, kind of you know, sort of really creating sort of something musical, whereas I was more interested in samples and what they do, and kind of riffs and bass lines and I guess, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but you know,
it totally makes sense. Look, there was clearly a magic that went on at Herbert Gardens, and it's quite bizarre for me, because literally, if I walk out my front door and turn left, in 4 minutes, I'm literally outside that house. I should go there and just, you know, pay respects to the house. While we're talking about samples, so I've got a couple of questions from some listeners. So Ryan asked, how did the James Bond theme get the okay, as wasn't there a white label with a different version?
Okay, yeah, I mean, so obviously when I made those tunes, I mean, like with every tune, I don't think about what's going to happen with clearance and what's going to happen even with the sale of the tune. I just make the tune, and kind of Trip to the Moon Part 1 was just this sort of back burner. I think the James Bond sample came in quite late into it. The actual sort of main vocal sample on it was sort of the main part of the tune, sort of Take Me Higher, by Tongue in Cheek. And it was just one of those things, like one week I'd gone out, come back, and then I'd sort of had this James Bond soundtrack, and I just sort of heard, you know, you only live twice, and the capsules in space, and it was just such a, I mean, that also moved me as well. I mean, you know, just that piece of music, and I just needed to sort of get that, you know, behind the beat. And then it kind of, because I had sort of Trip to the Moon on the back burner, it wasn't called Trip to the Moon, by the way. It was only called Trip to the Moon right at the last minute. I didn't really have a name for it. It was just my sort of next tune. And when I put the Bond sample all together and kind of made this whole thing, I then, you know, went to production house, played to everyone, and they were like, yeah, cool. And it just didn't seem like it was it just seemed like it was just another tune, like another follow-up, you know, to obviously what I'd done with Close Your Eyes. And there was quite a few tunes in between. So after Close Your Eyes, I kind of made Brothers Grimm, where the Exodus track. I kind of taken those sort of samples, and they were meant to be sort of new tunes, but they couldn't do anything with them because Close Your Eyes was still heavily in the charts. So Brothers Grimm became a sort of a home, if you like, for a few tracks. And then obviously working with Floyd and with DMS on things like the follow-up to Exterminate, things like King of Rock and Ecstatic. There was a lot of sort of cutting my teeth, if you like, kind of getting all these tunes as a build up to Trip to the Moon. And then Trip to the Moon Part 1 was then done. And I think, you know, we went, and I think I played that, and then I then already just thought, look, I'm not really quite happy with it. I've got this other James Bond sample that I want to use, and I'll make that, you know, I'm going to make this the main track. But then I sort of, you know, and they obviously listened to it and thought, well, okay, that's a good remix, so let's make that sort of an A and a B side. But then I'd made Obsessed and Life and Crimes of Rough Deck on the back of that, and so then it just was natural to sort of put it out as a sort of part 1 and part 2. And then yeah, what was the original point? Yeah, I think yeah, I've forgotten what we were talking about, the sample. Oh yeah, the James Bond sample.
We were talking,
right. So yeah,
so
basically obviously I'd taken the Capsules in Space sample, put that in the tune, and then that tune was done, finished, mixed. We then made the part 2 that would then again, you know, and then that, I think there was a bit of obviously a heavy rotation around with DJs. It was quite a big buzz. It was Steve Jackson, all the rest of it, Kiss FM, the whole thing. And then EMI, I think, knocked on the door or sent a message about the use of the samples. And I was almost like, I mean, there was definitely a time there where I just thought the tunes aren't going to come out. They're just not going to happen.
So this was all happening in the kind of promo stage. So you'd done part 1 and part 2, and they were kind of doing the rounds, all right?
Yeah. So you'd have these test presses that had obviously done the rounds as well. David was out giving them out to people like Hype and whoever, and just playing them. You know, it was just doing the circuit. And then there was a bit of a lull where obviously we were trying to figure out, well, what, you know, the sample's not going to be. It's going to be hard to clear. They were just. I mean, I wasn't involved in the talks, but there was definitely a good couple of weeks where it just looked like it wasn't going to come out. It wasn't going to happen. It was just too. It almost sort of made too much of a name of itself that they were going to put it on the back burner. But then, so I then went back in and then obviously tried to recreate about, I think there was about maybe 6 or 7 versions of it with different samples. I mean, I was trying all sorts of stuff and replaying the sort of strings to keep the same kind of emotional kind of mood, but without the sample, if you like. And so a few of those versions, me and Floyd, I think we mixed down at least another 4 versions, which one of them became the dubplate mix, which is now on this box set, I think. But I'm not sure where the other versions are. But they got played on Kiss FM. They were sent out to a few DJs, and finally they got the go ahead to re-record the sample, which was like, okay, cool. And then all of a sudden it was just like, I mean, I without even me doing anything, I think Phil had organized a sort of like a quartet or sort of like a mini sort of orchestra to come down to production house and just re-record those 2 samples, you know, the sunset, mountains and sunsets, and in part 2, and Capsules in Space in part 1. And I just had to, it was mad because that kind of went to that. And then I had to sample it again in the same way that I did on the W30, where I didn't have much space. So it was kind of on this sort of lower frequency to kind of give it the same vibe, even back then, you know, just to kind of hopefully that it sounds the same. It doesn't sound too cheap or whatever, you know, when you know, I kind of loved the quality of the original vinyl, you know, with the crack and with the way it was recorded. That's what I'm all about, is that when you take a sample from a vinyl, you're taking that era, the sound that was created then, you know. So to then have it re-recorded, but I mean, I think we got away with it, you know. So then these new these 2 mixes that came out became the final, and then there you have it. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. So the actual versions that came out were replayed, and you were cleared to replay those versions, because I think I certainly thought that was still just a sample, and I think that's what a lot of people,
maybe,
you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just probably because I was just using the same equipment to then slot it back into the same space. The one thing that I think the pro of doing that was it kind of hit the beat a bit more. There was a bit of free license to kind of for timing and stuff like that. So I felt like the new recorded versions were a bit more on the beat, whereas the first two versions were slightly off in places that I'd always hear that pissed me off. But sometimes you don't notice it until after the fact, you know, after it's been recorded. But yeah, so those mixes came out, and there you go. It was just that summer of '92.
Did you, so at the time of you creating these, was there kind of a vision for a part 1, 2, and 3? I mean, clearly, you know, 1 and 2, you know, organically happened to ensure that you could get both those sounds in. But at this point, you think, yeah, number 3 is going to be coming?
No, I mean, no, not at all. I mean, I again, when I made part 1, I didn't think about part 2, and then when I made, you know, the next track, it became part 2. And I mean, there was definitely, I was doing a shitload of raves and PAs all throughout that summer, and so I mean, there was this kind of, you know, when you're sort of on the ground and you're kind of hearing tunes every week and going out to raves every week, you can hear different styles sort of emerging, you know. And at that time, it kind of felt like sort of later on in sort of '92, everything started to get a bit more melodical, and people were using a bit more synth kind of sounds and piano lines, and you know, the Prodigy with I've forgotten the track. God, the one with lots of piano in it.
Your Love.
No, because that was earlier. I mean, like a bit later.
Oh,
kind
okay.
of. I'd have to anyway. Off the Experience album, but yeah, but basically, so it kind of just felt like I just needed. I was starting to sort of play. I was trying to sort of play a few piano lines, and then I just sort of, you know, I'd had this riff. I'd made the track, and then I just thought, yeah, okay, I'm just going to call that Trip to Moon Part 3. It just felt like, why not, you know? And
it's just amazing to hear that, because obviously for me, you know, and I'm sure many people, Trip to the Moon Part 1, 2, and 3, they just soundtracked '92. You know, they were just, you know, they really played a part in it, and you can hear that as the music evolved, you know, it was still very much you, but there was that evolution of the scene, you know, in that production as well. And I've got to say as well, it just, you know, it's not, you know, the A-sides, the Trip to the Moon, were phenomenal tunes, but it's not like, oh yeah, forget the B-side. Like, you know, Trip to the Moon Part 1, 2, and 3, you know, they're just amazing. The B-sides for all of them, you know, Obsessed, Life and Crimes of a Roughneck, you know, were just standout tunes in their own, and it's offered, well, I'm certainly guilty of it. You know, you get a 12, love that tune, yeah, that one's all right, and then you just go for the tune that you love and you play it, and you have to be quite conscious about picking it. But I generally pick up, you know, your releases and go, all right, I'm going to play that side, then I'm going to play the other side afterwards as well. I mean, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. The B-sides are. See, for me, I used to just make the track as best. I didn't really want to make fillers. I didn't really feel like, you know, I kind of wanted to give it as much gravitas as I did Trip to Moon Part 1, if you like. You know, when I made Obsessed, I mean, you know, something has to. I mean, obviously, it has to make sense. So Trip to Moon Part 1, Trip to Moon Part 2, like Life and Crimes of Roughneck was a big favorite of mine. I mean, you know, if anything, I almost felt, well, when I was making that, I was making an A-side, a track, you know, on its own. Another, you know, that was another record. But I don't know. I got on a roll in, you know, obviously at that time in sort of like, you know, spring and of '92, and I just had these tracks, and it was just the vibe, the whole scene, everything. You kind of don't, you know, if anything, I was making them in a state of insomnia. You know, it was almost like I sort of, you know, programming beats sort of, you know, started at sort of 7 o'clock in the evening, and then by the morning I'd had something. that I didn't know how I made.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, okay, I've got this track and I've got this track, and then it just sort of organically happened, and then all of a sudden it came out, and then part 3 was very similar, you know, to that, in the way that it just happened. Out of the blue.
And that's, you know, I think that's a testament to the tunes and why the tunes turned out like they did. You know, going into a studio with, right, okay, we've got to have a hit, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. You start putting up with too many walls and barriers, and there's too much pressure on it. It sounds like this was very much just a flowing process of, that sounds good, I'm going to do that. And before you know it, you've got, you know, 6 amazing tracks on your hands that have come out on, you know, three bits of vinyl. You know, obviously this is going to lead on to the big highlight of 2020. Let's face it, it's been a pretty shit year, and this box set is pretty much the highlight of it. But I just want to touch on a couple of other bits, because Chris Lunacy has been hugely patient in the background. Chris, we'll bring you in around 5 minutes, mate. So talk to me about kind of after kind of Trip to the Moon Part 1, 2, and 3 is out. You know, we're coming into the beginning of '93. Where's your kind of head out with, you know, making tunes, and where you're taking ACEN?
I mean, I think after obviously Trip to the Moon Part 3, there was definitely a lull where I just wanted to kind of go back and change things up a little bit. I'd started buying more bits of kit. I'd started, you know, taking time out, if you like. I'd had a few I was still sort of out there playing raves and PAs and that kind of thing, but I'd kind of taken a back seat. I kind of slowed down on the production, just because I wanted to sort of, I mean, you know, it was just a natural sort of lull, if you like. You know, you'd had this sort of great year of you know, with Close Your Eyes and all the other tracks, like all the other stuff that I was doing on Production House with Floyd, you know, remixes, house screw remixes, you know, so maybe sort of by the end of the year, I kind of felt like, well, we're going into a new year. It's '93. I felt like the scene was definitely changing. Sort of early '93, everything. There was a kind of like the sort of dark core thing sort of starting to emerge. You know, the kind of early kind of jungle sort of, you know, starting to come in, and everything was starting to go separate ways, if you like. You know, so Window in the Sky obviously came about, but Window in the Sky was again a slow burner. I'd had the sort of pianos from the first mix, Kingdom of Light mix, and I'd really changed up the equipment, which I don't think it was a good idea looking back, because that kind of slows you down. You know, you. I mean, I had a working formula with the drum machine sampler and a few synths and all that, but then now I start to almost get like Jean-Michel Jarre. You start to, you're plugging in synths and you're getting things MIDI retrofitted, and you're almost forgetting about the musicality side of it. You're becoming this sort of tech
engineer type thing.
Engineer guy, and so Window in the Sky was a little bit painful in that sort of respect. So, and it, you know, Monolithic Maniac was the mix I was the one that I was more proud of on that record, and that kind of came at the end. So I'd made Kingdom of Light mix, and then the Crystal Fairground one, and then sort of a little bit later I think we were doing some gigs in Canada and Toronto, and I came back and I just felt like I needed to it was just, I felt like the mixes were just a bit too light, and I wanted to sort of smash it a bit more with the Monolithic Maniac mix, and that kind of finished off Window in the Sky. But it wasn't the same vibe, obviously, that I'd had with obviously Trip to the Moon and the successor Trip to the Moon. I kind of felt like the scene was heavily changing then, and you kind of felt like you needed to really kind of go back to the drawing board a bit, and kind of maybe, it just maybe also not being inspired as much with such a high from sort of 92, 93 was kind of almost like a sort of arching down into something. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where my head was at. I mean, it was just, Window in the Sky came out and it done pretty well. But it was definitely the year of sort of where everything sort of started to break into different strands. And then I think obviously 94 came along, and, jungle sort of dark core was heavy, was formed, if you like. And then maybe there was sort of early signs of sort of, I don't know, sort of happier stuff happening over there. And so I kind of just I don't know, I kind of was there was a lot of record label stuff happening in the background. Obviously Baby D had signed a big deal with London Records, and you know the story there, that went to #1. So I'd also been signed to London Records, and so I was trying to sort of get an album going, but it kind of just wasn't quite happening. I just wasn't feeling inspired at that time. Sort of 94 going into 95, I was sort of almost sort of getting into the drum and bass vibe, I guess, you know, kind of the early sort of 96 Ed Rush and Optical style of stuff, you know, that was starting to come out, Metalheads and all that kind of thing. But I wasn't really sort of feeling anything in terms of my artist name and wanting to sort of follow up with anything, you know, at that time. It was just go back in to the drawing board and just kind of, you know, the identity had changed as well, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, like you're obviously spot on with it, and you know, I think 94, you know, was a big year, you know, for me. I loved a lot of the music. There was still, you know, very heavy break beats that were in there. You know, obviously the tempo had ramped up to sort of 155, 160 around that time. You know, as you were talking, you know, I was just kind of thinking of some of the producers and stuff around that time. I just thought, God, I wonder what, you know, if you'd had that kind of sort of Trip to the Moon type release in 94, you know, what that would have sounded like. I think it would have been pretty phenomenal. That era, like, you know, of the sort of Close Your Eyes, Window Sky, Trip to the Moon, have you got a particular track that, like, you know, that stands out for you? I never like to say the word favorite, but, you know, for something that, you know, meant really special to you.
I mean, look, Trip to the Moon Part 2 was always the big track for me, and it was always the one where I felt like I was able to sort of get across what was in my head, you know, you know, it almost sort of 90 to 100%. You can never get the tune the way you want to make it. You kind of start off with this thing in your head and you end up with something completely different. Whereas Trip to the Moon Part 2 it kind of just flowed. It just kind of just happened, and it just felt right. And but Trip to the Moon Part 3 was also a very satisfying record for me. Just the whole record, Obsessed, Pictures of Silence on one side, and Trip to the Moon Part 3, just the sound, the mix, the everything. Just because, you know, I had a lot of dampening moments with Trip to the Moon Part 1 and 2 because of the samples. You know, there was a lot of going back and forth and trying to figure out how you could butcher the track to try and get another sample in there that wasn't James Bond, because it may not have come out. So it kind of, you know, it was almost like by the time it came out, it was just like, wow, we got through that. And you know, I was kind of happy that it just suddenly it happened. You know, I was sort of thankful that I didn't really care how well it was going to do. It was just the fact that it was okay. Yeah, I spent all that time on the records, and they were, you know, it just about came out. But Trip to the Moon Part 3 was very sort of satisfying in the way that musically I really liked it from start to finish. And I kind of just felt like there was a bit of sort of magic in the sort of piano at the end, and you know, so that would probably be my personal favorite.
Yeah, nice. I've got to say, with all three of those tracks, you know, a producer comes out with a big song, you know, it's always difficult to follow that up, you know, that classic kind of second album story or the next big single. But mate, you smash it three tracks in a row. Like, you know, you really nailed it with those ones. And I've got to say, Obsessed is quite possibly, do you know what, I'm not even going to say it because it's not true. As soon as I said that, I thought Life and Crimes. Then like Trip to the Moon Part 3, like those little bell kind of sounds at the beginning. They're all just so magical in their own right, you know, and they truly have stood the test of time. And I think, you know, we're going to skip forward a good few years now. I know there's definitely gaps in the middle because, you know, when you came back into kind of my world was when you did Dirty Raver and Liquor as well. So I do want to ask you a quick question about that before we kind of move on and bring Chris in.
Yeah.
How did that come about? I'm assuming there's some kind of link with Rennie rhythm section from back there, but I'd love to hear the story behind those.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out how I got in touch with Rennie, or how Rennie got in touch with me. I don't quite know. I can't remember how that happened. But all I know is that he was running TCR, obviously, and
Yeah.
so I mean, just to quickly recap on I kind of made a few drum and bass tracks, or experimental drum and bass stuff, that got signed to a label in the States called F111. And it was a track called 116.7, and kind of like I'd sort of had a little run with sort of drum and bass, and then kind of in the early sort of 2000s I started to slow back down again, and it was almost like I started already feeling the retro vibe of the sort of breakbeat and the hardcore scene, and I kind of wanted to make something a bit tongue-in-cheek, and sort of Dirty Raver was, obviously it's got sort of a bit of a sort of house kind of vibe, a kind of where I just wanted to make a sort of warehouse type track, and obviously it sounds a bit like Flat Eric, and I kind of was I just loved I loved that track, and I love again the simplicity of just this sort of earworm kind of bass line, and kind of just this dirty, 4x4 beat, which I hadn't done a lot of 4x4 stuff.
Yeah, and there's a nice little kind of electro kind of bit in the middle of it as well, which works really nice as well. There's a good flow to that.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of just done that. I think I'd gotten to the point where I didn't want to, I was starting to almost take the piss of it again. It was kind of like just have some fun, and just don't, just make a track that you really like, and don't care about whether you have to find a home for it or anything. And so that kind of comes across, and it is a bit of fun. So I can't remember why. I think Liquor was the first tune that came out with Rennie.
And that was on Unreal, wasn't it? His little kind
that was on Unreal.
Yeah,
and that was in maybe in 2000. It was quite early,
2004 maybe.
Yeah. Because Dirty Raver had come out 2003, 2004. Because you were putting tunes out on Rennie's label as well, right? Or
I wasn't putting stuff out, but I was very heavily involved in the break scene. I kind of showed them at the time, and was involved in everything that was going on. So when he'd said to me that he got ACEN, I literally let out a little girly scream. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
Hey, you're
a nice guy.
He's amazing. I still talk to him now. I still speak to him. Yeah. And because you also did the video for that as well, didn't you? Because you obviously, you moved quite heavily into the video side of things.
Yeah. I mean, so the whole story with the video thing was obviously around sort of 2000. Everything was just sort of crashing. It felt like labels were sort of shutting down. I was kind of getting offered a few remixes here and there, but I really wasn't the kind of guy that could monetize music by doing jingles or something. Trying to find a sort of another career path, and I can't make music to order. I mean, I've had so many offers over the years of like, can you just make a house track, or can you just make this and make, and I'm just not that guy. In fact, I just can't. I don't know how to make that stuff. I kind of, when I switch on the machine, I almost don't know what I'm going to make, and whatever I make just happens, or it doesn't. It's really hard for me to write music to order, to try and make something that somebody else wants.
It sounds like there's music, right? You do what you do, and that's it. You're not a factory, right?
Yeah. So what was I going to say with the video thing? I made some drum and bass tracks, and Electronic Arts was connected to Warner Brothers, which is because the label F111 was part of Warner Brothers somehow. It was a little subsidiary. Electronic Arts was linked to them, and they'd be like, they were licensing some of the tracks for the game, for some of the games. Oh God, I can't remember. I can't believe I've forgotten the name of the guy. I think I mentioned it on your last show. Anyway, it got licensed to a few trailers, and they started sending me stuff where I had to cut the track to something visual, and that was my first sort of intro into video editing. To downloading Final Cut Pro you know, version 2 or whatever it was at the time.
Yeah.
And then suddenly like being mind blown by, you know, images and music. And so I just was just into this whole other world. I just got fascinated by everything video. And it kind of led me off into almost like a different career path. And in a way it was kind of a good, I mean, yeah, it kind of sort of saved me in a way, because I mean, I wasn't sure where the whole music thing was going for a good few years. I think a lot of people have that, and I mean, Lunacy will probably tell you the same. I mean, you kind of enter a wilderness for, you know, an artist wilderness for a good few years. My one turned out to be quite long, but I think yeah, the video thing just sort of took off, and I just started doing more experimental stuff. Obviously in the beginning you start shooting shorts just for the hell of it, short films, and then obviously Dirty Raver was a natural thing to just take your camcorder out and just do this thing and just edit it and just, you know, cut your teeth and just go, you know, and then move up, buy a better camera, you know, start, you know, the editing process. It's you know, taken me about a year to learn editing, just by, you know, and then color grading, and then just how to put a story together and that kind of thing. So I'd really kind of found another sort of whatever you call it, like an obsession or whatever, that sort of turned into my career, you know, that I you know, that I do today. So, you know, so yeah, and the music thing sort of kind of then took a real backburn. I mean, there was people asking me to do even PAs back then and follow-ups and all sorts of stuff, but I just was interested at that time. I think sort of, you know, in the sort of mid 2000s, I kind of was just full on into video production and trying to make stories, you know, documentaries and that kind of stuff. And then I moved to Dubai in 2008 and, you know, started working for video production companies here, and then went freelance. And, you know, the music sort of started to filter back when you're, you know, like everyone else at this sort of generation where you kind of settled a bit, and then suddenly you kind of start to feel the music again. You start to find it interesting to sort of play with breakbeats and samples, and, you know, so that obviously segues into
it does indeed, because obviously even prior to this. So first of all, let me bring in Lunacy, because Chris has been very patient. Chris, how you doing, mate? How you doing? All right?
Doing good, and you?
Good, mate. Thank you very much for kindly and patiently waiting there, mate. It's
my pleasure. It's been fascinating. I was wanting to say a few things because, forgive me, but me and ACEN have been talking for like maybe 2 years, and I must just be a terrible person because I didn't know any of that. I didn't ask any of those things. Like, I'm just, I don't know. I've never functioned that well with normal people conversation, so I didn't do any of the normal people questions. But it was amusing to me to hear him say how he got into it, because I was like, oh, that's me. That's also me. That's also me. I went to Groove Records. I got into it because of Breakdance the movie and the electro stuff. Like, it was just funny to listen to it and be like, oh, yeah, that's what I used to do with all those things.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was
I flirted with roller skating as well. I used to go to Harrow Skate Park. I think there was about 2 years of skating. I think you mentioned was you in skateboarding or?
Yeah, I skateboarded for a long time. Yeah,
and that's
so almost like
that Harrow Skate Park. That's by Harrow Leisure Centre, right? That one.
Yeah.
I know on my bike. Yeah, wasn't.
I couldn't help but wonder if we crossed paths. Like, you may have just been going through past Groove Records when I was leaving or something, because it was the same time and the same thing. Weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. There you go.
So listen, we've obviously come to this kind of monumental, let's call it the savior of 2020, shall we? Because it's been a pretty shitty year, right? Well, look, just before we get to the box set, let's talk about Thriller and Play 92, because obviously, you know, these were original productions, which, you know, both those were fantastic, and they've just got that ACEN sound. So I'm assuming then a few years back then, you know, you're starting to get those kind of musical juices flowing again, and these come into the fold, right?
Who are you talking to me?
Yeah.
To ACEN, sorry, yeah, that's right. Duh.
So you're sorry, just rephrase that really quickly. So you want to talk about what coming back with Play,
for Thriller and Play 2092?
Yeah. God. So, I mean, basically, I was dabbling with tunes over the last few years, obviously working, with software and that kind of thing. And I think Play, I just made a track, and Lunacy just happened to be emailing me every few months about, possibly putting out something. And I just never had anything that I thought was worthy. I just had lots of I have about, I think 50,000 8-bar loops of stuff on hard drives over the last 10 years that I just never finished. It just always gets to a point where I want to start something new the next day. Because the beauty of today, where you can, I think back in the day you were restricted and you had to do stuff in a certain way, whereas today it's just infinity. There's too many different ways digitally to do stuff, so you kind of just get lost. So I think Lunacy, Chris had sort of put the seed in my head, and I kind of it just came to a head. I think Bangface had got in touch about doing a gig, and that kind of set it off. And then I'd done the interview with you, and I think I finished Play just around that time, right? I don't think I was talking about Play on your.
I think, it must have been just after that. Yeah.
It was just after that, yeah. So I almost, it just felt right. It was just one of those things where you just had something that I felt, well, okay, this I kind of like this, So, I'll upload it. I'll upload a teaser and see what happens. And then, obviously, I'd forgotten about Chris. Chris had got in touch. Hardcore Energy had got in touch about we really like what you've done there, and we really like to put something out. And I just was like, okay, well, I'll put it out. And then the whole thing with the whole vinyl fiasco thing came up, where it was just like people asking for vinyl. And I remembered that Chris was so big on vinyl, so I just wanted to sort of make something happen with Chris and kind of go, well, look, can we do something here? Can we do a joint thing? And it happened. I mean, obviously Chris is really easygoing, and he'd spoken to Martin at Hardcore Energy, and they'd worked something out. And there you go. That Play 2092 came out, and I'd already made a track a couple of years back called Return to 2092. So that was a first sort of, something that I felt like, okay, I'm going to upload to SoundCloud and just leave it there. And when I get something else like that, I'll do the same thing. But luckily you have people like Chris, who's just has a big machine set up ready to sort of press it up on vinyl.
I didn't have a machine then, but I had been trying to get ACEN to do some vinyl, but it was really intimidating because it's ACEN. Like, people tend to think, I think whatever part of the scene you came in on, like I came in to start making music after being influenced by ACEN and the House Crew and Hyper Experience and all those people. So for me, I was like emailing somebody who I'd admired for decades, and I couldn't really be like, come on, put a record out with me, it'll be great. Like, I felt like I was just, why would he put a record out with me? Like, this is ACEN. It's not like just some dude who's done nothing. Like, I was dancing to his tracks before I even got in the studio. They've been like massive parts of my life. So I didn't want to be too much pressure. I didn't want to be hassling him all the time. And then I saw it was coming out as a digital, and loads of people were asking for vinyl. So when ACEN said, oh, could you do the vinyl? I was like, quick, drop everything, because we're going to do an ACEN vinyl. So, I phoned up my pressing plant, and I was like, guys, we have to have this vinyl tomorrow because it's important. So please help me out here. And they helped me out. And then I spoke to Martin. I spoke to him first, actually, and he was cool. So it was really a case of having the three people involved all being nice, which I found is actually a key thing, because like, you wouldn't be doing at this point in time. It might change in a couple of years as things get bigger, but at this point of time, if you're making this sort of music, you're probably all right, because you're not going to be doing it for the money, because there isn't any, so you're obviously doing it because you love the music. And if you love the music, you're not going to put up barriers to putting the music out. Do you see what I mean? So both Martin and ACEN and me were all on the same page, really. We were like, we need it on vinyl, let's get it done. So I said to the press, I think it took 48 hours from shall we do the vinyl to having the vinyl ordered with the sleeve done and the tracks mastered. I have John Doe do my mastering, and I was like, John, I need this mastered tomorrow. And he was like, what is it? And I was like, it's ACEN. He's like, it's ACEN. You know what I mean? So everybody just kind of fell in line, because why wouldn't you? So yeah, that's how that came about, and it was amazing for us as well, because we've been doing records, selling them on our store and stuff, and we would put up a record, and we'd have a new release come out, and we'd sell 50, 60, 100, and it would take a couple of weeks, 150, 200, and it just happened that when we put play up, I was at a restaurant and I'd put up the usual thing. We thought we were going to press 200 or 300, because even though it's ACEN and that's amazing, the vinyl record scene was just starting to pick itself up, and even now it's very hard to judge at any sort of sales of units. So I put it up and put like a couple of hundred on the store and gone to have some food. And while I'm eating with the wife and the kids are throwing pasta at each other, I get a text from Shane, who runs KFA for me, and Glyn and a few others. I have a few people that help me. It's not all me on my own doing Nightforce. And they were keeping an eye on the store, and they were like, Chris, we've sold 150 and it's only been up for a couple of hours and it's going to run out and people aren't going to be able to buy it. So I'm sort of sitting in a restaurant tapping around my phone going, oh, you have to log in here and make sure there's enough product, because it was just completely caught us off guard, really. It shouldn't have done, but it still did, because you just don't know.
Well, I think especially...
So it was very exciting. It was our first incredibly exciting new... I mean, it's always exciting putting music out. I love this music and always have. So every time we've got a new release, even if it does terrible, I'm excited about it. But this was the first one that felt like a flame had been lit and everything sort of went... when we were like, quick, catch up,
Well, I've got to say, Chris, hats off to you, because you've been a huge supporter and pushing re-releases and more importantly supporting new artists and getting new music in various styles and tempos, and supporting vinyl as well. I've got to say you're probably one of the biggest labels that are out there putting it out there. Also, thank you from me and behalf of pretty much everyone's listening. Thank you for prodding ACEN every couple of months, because I'm pretty sure if I had not been here in this situation had you not done that.
But the thing is with that, you see, ACEN is he's humble, so he won't say it. And I was thinking about this while you were talking about it. He's an incredibly talented musician, but he does things in his own time. And a lot of record labels tend to forget that artists have got an art. You can't tell an artist, you need this now, you have to do this tomorrow, I want it this way. You're defying the whole purpose of art if you start boxing it up and trying to package it that way. So while obviously I wanted a new ACEN tune, I also recognise that hassling him is counterproductive. It doesn't. Some artists, like I need hassles. I need restrictions and deadlines to get things done. If I'm given a studio and I don't have any reason to make something, I don't make anything. That's just the way I'm built. But some artists, like ACEN, for example, I think need to be left alone to do what they want to do. And that's the way you get the best music from them, because they're doing it how they want to do it. And that's how it should be, really. So I was trying to hassle him without hassling him. Like, please make these tunes, but don't do it unless you don't want to, but please do it.
Yeah.
Line.
Well, I think, we're definitely thankful for it, because I've got to say, like, this box set is just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Even if you remove all of the original remastered tracks of it, it's phenomenal. There's so many parts of it, and I think if you're going to do something like this, you do it properly. And you guys have absolutely knocked it out the park with this. There's remastered versions of the originals. There's dubplate versions. There are 2092 versions. There are remixes. I mean, there is just literally something. I mean, I played a very good selection of them on Tuesday, and even really, there's only 7 or 8 tracks, and there's a variety of remixes of them. The show just, it didn't feel repetitive in any way, and Close Your Eyes and various samples kept happening, but they all had their own unique flavor. I think from supporting up and coming artists doing remixes and people like Pete Cannon, which again, I'm sorry, I can't stop laughing when I say Pete Cannon, because I just think about that remix he did, and it is just fucking ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. He has done a stand-up job. I think the NRG remix on there as well. Future Assassins, is that do you know what, there's so many questions. Before we get there, let's talk about how this project came to be the start of the conversation. How did it all kick off?
Well, I didn't want to ask ACEN for Trip to the Moon or anything like that, because I like doing remasters, but my joy is the new stuff because I was there when those things came out, and so I love them and I know them intimately. You know, I could probably sing along to every drum edit in all the Trip to the Moons without missing one. I know every single bit of it. So much as I love those tunes, for me, with doing Nightforce, when I restarted stuff and started doing vinyl, I was like, okay, represses are cool and that's fine, but if we're going to get anywhere, we need new music, and we need it in the old sort of sound and the old style. And it like a reset. Like imagine if we went back to 1991 to 93 or 94 and said, let's pretend nothing else happened. Let's pretend after 96 no music happened. Where would we go? You know, so we don't make the same mistake. So my emphasis when I spoke to ACEN, first of all, and exactly the same as when I spoke to Hyper on Experience and to various others, has been, let's do new stuff. Let's do new stuff, but like in the old way, so we get that old feeling, because that's what we all loved in the first place. A lot of us, the older school producers, I think got a bit disillusioned. We all got to a certain point. For me, it was about 97 or 98. For ACEN, it sounded like around 95, 96, where we got to it and thought, well, I'm not really feeling this. This isn't what I got into it for. Like for me, I was in the more hardcore side of things and it all went kick drum. And I love that stuff, but it wasn't what I liked doing, you know? So anyway, my point is I wanted to get new music. I didn't want to be like, let's do Trip to the Moon, you know? And also I didn't think it was even on the table. It never occurred to me that I could do that. I don't, that's not the way I think. So he actually sent me a thing. He had mentioned it and I thought, yeah, that's not going to happen. But because I just couldn't believe it, like as if there's going to be a new Trip to the Moon or something. He had mentioned it. And then he actually sent me I think it was an MP3 version in his usual humble way. Oh, I've just been messing around with this. I don't know if it's any good. And I put it on and I'm listening to a new version of Trip to the Moon. And I was like, I remember it because Wilder, my 4-year-old, was running around doing something crazy. And my 3-year-old was crying probably because that's his hobby. And I was sitting there listening in my front room to Trip to the Moon, like a new version. And I had like goosebumps and I was like a little kid. I was like, oh my God, like, this is just like, honestly, it was just one of those amazing things. And of course, then we started talking about it once that had become a thing. And again, like I was saying, I don't like to push, but I tend to be, if I have any skill in this industry, it's that when I hear a thing, I can imagine various options and projects and I can put something together. And as soon as I heard it, I thought, well, it's Trip to the Moon. You've got to do a box set. I've never done a box set before on Nightforce, so it wasn't like I will do this because I know this will work. It was more like, this is Trip to the Moon. It's a seminal release. You can't put Trip to the Moon out like, it's Trip to the Moon. Like, this is Trip to the Moon, you know, like, so you have to have all the bells and whistles and you don't want to overkill it, but you want to have it as absolutely the best possible thing you can make. So then for the next, I don't know, 6 months, I'm not sure, I'm very bad with time. Me and ACEN would bump forward ideas. Could we do this? What about this? Would this work? Is this overkill? Is this too much? And we just kind of got it together stage by stage until we felt we had something really, really good, you know. And I think it's probably the best thing I've ever been involved in, honestly, as far as just like getting a whole project together of really, really brilliant music, you know. Everything from the Danny Bird remix to getting future Assassins involved, because I know Austin from back in the Suburban Bass days, but I didn't know if I could get him to do new old school, because that's a conversation I have a lot with people, you know, like when I spoke to NRG, are you up for making new old school? It's a weird conversation to have, because you have to be like, I want you to make new music, but don't be too clever, because, like, you know, I don't want a bunch of filters and I don't want a dubstep breakdown. This has got to sound like it was from back in the day, but it can still go forward, you know. Like, it's a weird thing, and it can be quite hard to get that right. But yeah, we've got future Assassins in, and Pete Cannon, of course, is an annoying genius. He's not annoying in person; it's just annoying that he's so good. I love Pete.
He's got bigger hair than me as well, so
he's easily got the best hair in hardcore. So if there was an award for that, he would win hands down. But he's so incredibly talented. Like, as soon as we started talking about Trip to the Moon, I was like, well, we have to have Pete involved because that'll be amazing. And then we wanted to get Two Bad Mice doing a remix. We had really hoped for Two Bad Mice to remix Trip to the Moon, but quarantine and COVID completely messed that up because they couldn't work together. We're still hoping that will happen. You know, we've got a few things that might happen, in which case we will offer them to the box set people, like really cheap or something, if we can do it, like there might be another vinyl because there was Two Bad Mice and there's other things that we're talking about. So if something can be added to the box set at a later date, we'll do it, because COVID just messed some things up.
Yeah.
But the NRG remix is stunning. I don't think there's a single track on the whole box set that isn't brilliant. My personal favourite actually is Rings Around the Moon, which is ACEN's probably an odd track on there, because it's the only one that isn't. Like it's not a remix or one of the things. It's a new track. And again, ACEN sent me that like he does. I'm not sure about this. Floyd says it's all right, but I don't think it's very good, or it's not really a remix. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is brilliant. This has to be on the vinyl. Like, we can't not have this on the vinyl. Are you mad? But I mean, I do understand it, because when you make the thing, you're like the center of the wheel. You don't have the perception because you made it. You know, when I make something, I hear all the things that are wrong with it, and I think that's just part of being a producer. If you're genuinely into the music, you tend to be very critical of your own music. And by the time you finished it, you're normally so involved with how you created it, you don't really have a good view of what it is. A lot of the time, I think.
Yeah.
So Si's come in. He does say sorry, apologies for it. So obviously, you know, having that happen for a little Two Bad Mice remix forthcoming will be very nice indeed.
Well, we hope it can still come. I'll have to email you, Si. It wasn't your fault. I mean, COVID messed up a lot of things. I mean, it's delayed the box set, unfortunately. We blocked off some time for it, but then we had so many orders that we've had to do it. We're going to have to do extra, and that's not going to come till January at the earliest, again, because now England's on lockdown and the pressing plants are overwhelmed, and, you know, COVID has generally messed up. So I am also very pleased we got this brilliant release in 2020. We'll actually beat COVID at some things, I think.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's just the way it goes.
ACEN, I wanted to ask you, out of any kind of standout mixes for you that have been done for this this box set?
I mean, NRG, obviously, when I heard that, I was just like blown away by that mix. I love Danny Bird's mix. I mean, he just really nailed it, just, you know, with all the original kind of riffs in there. And I mean, I love Luna C's mix as well. He'd send that to me, and he was all like, I don't know if you know, same thing that I do to him. He was just like, you know, I've got this, and he didn't even tell me who it was by, and I just said, okay, I like that. Who's it? And he said, I'd done that. You know, he'd actually sort of had that on the back burner a couple of years back, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that's embarrassing, you see, because the trouble is with ACEN, every single artist, and every single producer I spoke to, and I said, like, there was not a single person. When I approached someone like Danny Bird, for example, and said, would you be interested in doing a remix for ACEN? There's no pause. It's just instant, yes, of course. His stuff totally influenced me. I can't believe it. I would love to do that. When can I start? That was basically the response of everyone. And another thing is, and because hardcore is full of people that do things that they maybe shouldn't legally, but we've all done it. Pretty much everyone has had a go at doing a remix of Trip to the Moon. If you're a producer, you've heard Trip to the Moon and gone, cool, I wonder if I could do that. And so, you know, I had done it myself, because like years ago, I hadn't got anything else I was doing. And I was like, Trip to the Moon is such an impressive track. So I tried to do my own version. And I think if everybody, you know, you could probably, if you put a thing out, everybody who's made a Trip to the Moon remix, send it here, you'd probably get 700, 800 versions of it in the space of a couple of hours. So I was a bit embarrassed, you know, because I was like, now I'm dealing with ACEN and I did this remix, and I feel like I've been a naughty boy. I don't want to tell him. But on the other side of things, I was, you know, so I just thought I'd send it to him and not say who it is and see if he likes it. Because then if he hates it, I can go, oh, it doesn't matter, forget it.
I've got to say, the D-Bridge one, it was a real good standout one for me as well, just because it was so different, and it wasn't drum and bass. It just is what it is, and it's just an amazing version of it.
I mean, I was a big fan of Bad Company, obviously, and I was following D-Bridge on Instagram, and I mean, again, it was just one of those things. Obviously, having knowing that this thing is coming out, and I just had to reach out to him and just sort of see if he was interested in doing a mix. And then I got Chris to kind of deal with him and make it all happen. But I was quite chuffed with that as well, just because I'm just such a big fan of Bad Company, what they do or what they did. sort of in the early 2000s, but late 90s. But I mean, the whole thing again for me just came. Again, it's sort of just happened now, and I can't figure out how it happened. But it's again with Chris sort of driving it as well, with the again putting the whole thing together. I mean, I make the tracks, and he's kind of he's done a phenomenal job of getting these artists remixes, thinking up ideas, and if you slotting it in and trying to make it so that we can get it to sort of beat COVID, if you like, and get it out in 2020. But yeah, I mean, I love everything on the box set. I would have said, I would have told Chris no.
I always give artists the final say. I think that's another thing that record labels forget. I try to remember that I'm an artist, so if it was me, like I want the artist to be happy with what they're doing. Like I've got an artist who's done some work for a lot of other labels recently who didn't like the sleeve design we had done. And so he's like, oh, I'm not really sure on that. And I'm like, it's fine. It's your record. It should look how you want it to look, So we went through a couple of sleeves until we got the right one. It was tedious to do, but the artist has to have the thing how they want it. Otherwise, why are you doing it? That's the nature of art. So I've always said art first, then the music and everything else. And after that, you worry about the business bit. So with Trip to the Moon, we just did the things that we thought were going to be great. And we kept doing them until we had something that we thought was really great. And then we put it out. And then I thought, I hope we can pay for this. But that's always been, I've never really, I mean, maybe I'm a terrible businessman, but that's not the way I think, because I've had enough things go wrong in the industry and I've tried doing that thing where you do something to earn money. And I just don't think it works. I think the only way to really live and to do any sort of art is to put that first and have the best time doing that. Like, I've absolutely loved every bit of putting this project together. And the result is you get something pure and genuine and authentic, and people respond to that, and then it does well. Whereas if you try and do something like, this is the way we'd make some money, it ends up becoming bean counting, and all the passion drains out of the project, and what you end up is with something that's just kind of beige and nobody wants it.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing for me about this about these releases, is that they're all interesting. Like, typically you get a compilation, or you get an album, you'll pick a handful of that that are real standout tracks, and you may end up playing them over and over again, and some get a little bit lost. But I do feel with something like this, there's something interesting in every little corner that you look in this box. And from what you've said and the approach, that makes total sense. And the rewards are, well, I'm going to assume it is done pretty well on the pre-sale. Don't feel obliged to, add on to that, but I'm fairly confident.
It has done. Both me and ACEN have had our jaw on the floor about how well it's done. We it's so difficult because you just don't know. Yes, it's a classic and it's an anthem and everybody knows it. But with reselling vinyl, that can actually be a problem because people already have it. And the things that have sold, like if you're going to do bean counting, the things that seem to sell are the stuff that is either very rare or was quite popular but badly made. And the Trip to the Moons are neither of those. The Trip to the Moons are fantastically made. Their production stands up, and they sold a lot. So we weren't sure how well it would do at all. But again, so we had low expectations, and then it did phenomenally, and it's still doing phenomenally. And both ACEN and I mean, I think it deserves to, but deserve is also not a thing in the music industry. A lot of music that absolutely deserves to do well doesn't, and a lot of music that doesn't deserve to do well does really well. So I hoped for the best and expected the worst, which is what I usually do with all music stuff. But in a way, it doesn't matter because it's brilliant. So if it had have sold 5 copies, I would still be absolutely thrilled with it because it's one of the best things that's ever happened as far as I'm concerned with the music and what I'm doing and what ACEN's done. I just think it's fantastic. So it's gratifying that it's done well. But if it hadn't have done well, I would still be over the moon about it.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
No pun intended, no.
Yeah. I forgot to mention Pete Cannon as well. I mean, that was the most exciting mix I heard. I mean, I was a big fan of Pete Cannon anyway. I mean, watching his little vids and mucking around with the old equipment. I'm a big tech geek as well. I mean, I enjoyed those videos, and to now see something that he's done featuring me, I sent him a message saying that kind of blew me away. Looking at him as a fan. And so that was really exciting to sort of hear his mix, and I, you know, I was so chuffed with that. When Chris said that he can make that happen, that was like, you know, a big highlight for me on this box set.
See, again, I mentioned it to Pete, and he was just instantly all over it. There was not, you know, ACEN's like, I'm glad he made it happen. ACEN could have just gone, Pete, do you want to do it? And Pete would have just straight in. Same as everyone. We're all like that.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, just to again touch on the scene, if you like. This whole sort of time over lockdown, me making the track, the one thing that I think helps me make music like this is when I don't listen to a lot of other genres, like in terms of like things like what Chris mentioned there, like dubstep or house, and even back then in sort of '92, I did get into a phase where I was just buying solely sort of other music for samples, and you know, sort of almost tunnel vision, making a track that I wasn't influenced by too much by the scene, or by, I don't know, Shut Up and Dance, Prodigy, whoever that. I mean, I loved their music, but I tried to sort of stay away from sort of following too hard, because that then I like Chris said, I didn't want to make something that was just another tune. So you know, even when he was getting in touch with me, he probably didn't realize that when I had played 2092, I was also intimidated by the you know, the current scene that we're in. There is no scene. There's no, you know, I don't know. I just made this track, again, sort of tunnel visioning something that I would like to hear today. And wouldn't it be cool if I could make something that just really nails that time, you know, 1992, 93, 91, and kind of get that vibe and just stop faffing around with, you know, just go right back in and try and channel sort of my 19-year-old self to, you know, that is what interested me in kind of coming back and doing this, is just because that is the music that inspired me most in my life, you know. So I just kind of wanted to with Trip to the Moon 2092, I tried to keep it as real as possible in terms of really, you know, trying hard to sort of make something that was authentic and you know, not played out. And I didn't want to kind of just make, you know, a follow up like Jean-Michel Jarre or Tubular Bells, you know, 10 years later. Here's a 2020 version of it with you know, dubstep type vibe or whatever it is. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of you know, touch on that really.
Yeah, no,
I think that's the key to it, though, isn't it? It's the, like, I don't think any of us older producers thought we'd get the chance to go back and do what we initially got into the scene to do, you know?
Yeah.
Because there's so many rules in music now. If you're into drum and bass, you can't go making a drum and bass at 145 BPM. You can't go and put a kick drum in it. You've got a bunch of boxes that all the music has been put in. And the genius of old school is that you can just ignore all of that. You know, you can just say, that doesn't matter. If you want to put you can't put a kick drum and a bass tone together, because then it makes a mess in the mix. But you can in old school, because no one cares. You can't have a track where the format is all like higgledy-piggledy. Like if you look at an ACEN track or a Hyper Experience or any of the really classic tracks, there's no format. It's a perfectly made piece of music, but it's not like, here's the drums and here's the first breakdown and here's the vocal and here's the next breakdown and here's the outro. Do you know what I mean? And I think everybody that got into this music loves that. The freedom of it is wonderful. I know NRG loves it. I know ACEN does. I know Hyperon does. Just to be able to go back to when we first started and be like, we don't have to do anything. You can just do what you love doing. That's a really nice thing to be able to do as a musician.
Yeah. And this is kind of goes back to what we were talking about, that kind of musical structure and element to it. You know, it's not that kind of classic, right, this is the bit that the DJ's going to mix in, this is when it's going to come in, right, this is the mix out point. It's a song. You can listen, you know, and this sort of saying earlier, you could put that song on and listen to it from start to finish, and you're getting magic, you know, throughout that whole journey that you're listening to it.
Yeah, I'm not criticising any of that. I don't want people to think I'm criticising any of the new style. They've all got great things about them. I'm just saying that old school was when people had no idea what they were doing, and the result was you could do anything. And that's a lot of fun in a day and age where there's a lot of restrictions, and as soon as you make something, they're like, oh yeah, Gabba Tech Stack, Liquid, Drum and Bass Jungle, and it's there with 4 other people that are making that in this nice little box and this corner of iTunes with its friends. Whereas you do something like Trip to the Moon and it comfortably doesn't fit anywhere. And I love that sort of thing. That's my favourite sort of thing. It's just its own world. And Old School was that. It was just everybody doing all sorts of interesting things. So that's a freedom that is really nice to revisit.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, you know, just kudos to you guys for putting this together, because it is, you know, it's cementing a bit of history, keeping history alive, and it's giving it a new breath of fresh air all at the same time as well. And that's what kind of makes this package kind of so. It makes it sound like I'm trying to sell it. I'm not. I actually bought one because I'm not missing out on this, no way. And that's one of the things I wanted to say to you about, was that it was nice to hear that there wasn't like a small pre-capped number of pre-orders, and it was all just a panic to get to the website, because we all know how that ends. The website crashes 3 minutes past, and then
which happened.
Which did happen as well, but at least you could go back comfortably a couple of hours later and still secure. And you've still got it up for pre-order now, is that right?
Yeah, it's going to be up for pre-order for probably another 2 weeks. It has been an extraordinary amount of orders. So I'm kind of talking to the pressing plant and saying, we need to do this. But it's going to be open for another 2 weeks. We didn't want to put a limit on it because, well, the limited edition thing is used to sell music a lot of the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes as a record label, you're forced into it because you have minimum runs and minimum things you can do. So you have to kind of use it to your advantage. You have to make the decision on how many you're going to sell before you know how many you can sell a lot of the time. So it forces you to be like, well, guess how many, and then say it's a limited edition. And then we've only got that many when they arrive. And you can't just, I don't think people understand, you can't just order 50 more. Like when you press records, you might press 300, 400, 500, but you can't then go, oh, we need an extra 20. You have to order another 300, 400 or 500, and that's too many. You know, so it puts any record label in a tricky position when you're doing something. But I agree with you. I think most labels want to give it to as many people as possible, but you have no choice in some ways. You're restricted to. But with this, again, it was Trip to the Moon, so we tried to leave it as open-ended as possible, which is good, because if we had done my original limited thing, because we did talk about it, I was like, well, we'll limit it to 300. That would have gone in the first hour. So I'm glad we didn't do that. You know, because I want as many people to get it as possible. Anything any record label does, but you're trying to work within the constrictions of the production of vinyl, which is a very old way to produce things, and you're dealing with companies that want to press 500,000 of things, not 200.
Yeah, no, I know the pain very well through a couple of labels that I had. I think I did about 20 vinyl releases altogether. So fully, and that was even, you know, nowhere even near COVID, and that was always fun and games with that side of things. So you know, I certainly appreciate that. Listen, guys, I'm going to wrap it up because ACEN, I'm aware that it is now gone 1:30 in the morning for you. So appreciate that. We're crossing multiple time zones from Dubai to London to the US. So guys, listen, thank you both very much for the time today, ACEN, especially for sharing all those stories, mate. I know that it's much appreciated personally. I know there's been lots of comments about that. Chris, I'm going to get you back because I know that you have a phenomenal story to tell. So I know as a guest spot today, you've filled in some great spots on the Nightforce, but we need to hear the Lunacy story and the bigger Nightforce story as well, which we'll definitely look forward to and get you in early in the next year. So chaps, once again, thank you very much for your time. I don't even think I have to wish you luck with the box set because I think we've already sussed out that it's going to do well. But I will thank you for all the effort and time and energy that you put into it, because you've done a stand-up job. All the remixes, everything involved. So yeah, great work, chaps, and thank you again.
And thank you for having us on. It's been really good.
Yeah. Nice.
Sorry, it's so dark. I forgot to turn the light on. It's my world.
I switched the light on.
All right, guys. Catch you later.
Thank you.
Nice one.
Bye.